Please be seated. Before we resume, just a few matters. The documents that go up onto the Lexall hearing book and that are displayed, what we'll try and do is just put up the non-redacted version, non-redacted portions of the documents. It'll be less confusing that way. But what goes into evidence, of course, is the entire document, because that's necessary, I think, in case you have to put the non-redacted parts in context of either the part or the whole. But the parties can rest assured that we are well aware that we can only rely on documents that are relevant to the terms of reference. Now, Mr. Connolly is to give evidence today. It's unlikely that we will finish his evidence today, and we propose to proceed in the same way as we did for Mr. Ord and Mr. Sargent, which is that we will complete the sections that can be completed, including all examination and re-examination, in fairness to Mr. Connolly, so that he's not limited in his access to advisors. The commissioners will probably, depending on time, will probably defer their questioning of Mr. Connolly until a later time. But of course, there may be a need to circle back to matters that have been dealt with. In relation to Mr. Connolly's witness statement, we propose to make it available to the media after the lunch break today. It can be redacted to remove personal information. There's the first line, for example, but Mr. Connolly's legal advisors, if there's anything else they would like redacted from that statement, they should speak to the solicitors assisting as soon as we break for lunch. Grateful to the solicitors for Crown for the draft minute of proposed non-publication order. We will deal with that as soon as time permits. All right, now if we can, is there anything before we call Mr. Connolly?
No.
Mr. Connolly? If you would mind just standing at the witness section, thank you. And could you state your full name for the record, please?
My name's Michael Christopher Connolly.
And would you like to swear an oath or make an affirmation?
I, Michael Christopher Connolly, sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence that I give to this commission shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but.
Thank you. Please sit down, Mr. Connolly. Yes.
Commissioners, Mr. Van Dongen, I seek leave to appear for Mr. Connolly.
Van Dongen.
Mr. Connolly, you've prepared a witness statement in this matter, is that right?
That's correct.
That's a witness statement dated the 7th of May 2021, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you have a copy of that in front of you at the
I
moment?
do.
And does that contain the Royal Commission's identifying number MCN.0001.001.001 on the top right?
It does.
And is that witness statement true and correct?
Yes, I believe it is.
And you like that as your evidence?
Yes, I do.
Tender that witness statement.
Thank you. The witness statement of Michael Christopher Connolly, which bears the document identifier MCN.0001.0001.0001 will be admitted into evidence as an exhibit.
Wishes, please.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Carl.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr Connolly, you commenced work as a casino inspector in 1990, is that right?
That's correct. I mean, actual work in 1990, yep.
And you were a casino inspector until 2002?
That's correct.
And I understand from your witness statement that you had approximately 4 months full-time training before you commenced as an inspector in 1990.
That's correct.
Was that training run by the department?
Yes, it was.
And who specifically ran the course in the sense of what was their position within the department?
There were a number of people who ran the course, as I recall, and senior inspectors, as I remember that, as quite a while ago, but I think it was the senior inspectors at the time.
And can you just give me a thumbnail sketch of the course content?
Course content was, as I remember it, predominantly around table games and electronic games, learning the rules, the procedures, becoming familiar with the legislation, directions in particular, around the activities, understanding the activities, surveillance, security, just basically understanding how the casino worked.
Was any explanation given to you about the overarching regulatory purposes of casino regulation in Western Australia?
Not that I recall.
Do casino inspectors still undergo full-time training such as you undertook before they commence in their role?
No.
Do they undergo any training at all?
It's predominantly on the job. We haven't had new inspectors for quite a while, but it's predominantly on the job.
And when did the position change from full-time training, such as you had, to the more predominant on-the-job training?
Again, this is quite a while ago, but I think, as I recall it, my cohort of inspectors that joined was probably the last time we had training of that scope, that extent, 4 months or so. Yeah.
And do you have any knowledge or insight into the reason for the change?
No.
You don't?
No.
All right. Now, we were just talking about training before you begin your
Yep.
job as an inspector. Was there any formal training provided to you during the course of your job as an inspector, once you had started?
So there's on the job training provided. We had regular training days in the days when we had a permanent casino inspector presence. Those training days had sessions that were, again, often run by senior inspectors. They were, I think the primary purpose of those was to refresh and to make inspectors aware of anything that's new or that had changed.
Right. And you say, if I understood your answer just then, that those were regular training days when you had a permanent physical presence of inspectors at the Perth Casino.
Yeah, that's right.
And that changed in 2015?
It was around about 2015 that
Yes.
changed. Yep, that's right.
And so do you have regular training days now?
No.
What's the sort of training that is offered now?
Not much, if I'm frank. Training's generally, again, on-the-job training, and information's provided to inspectors at regular inspectors meetings, but I think it's a stretch to call that training.
All right. And do you have any knowledge or insight of or into why there was a change from having the regular training days to not?
Probably insight, not knowledge, but certainly in the earlier days when the casino had a larger inspectorate based at the casino, rosters were 4 on 4 off, and there was always an additional day that people were required to work. That was used as a training day. Those arrangements are not in place anymore.
So is it a question of just no available time to have training?
I think that's probably what it is. Yeah, no available time.
Are there resources, if there was an available time for inspectors as a group, I think you're saying, to all meet together and train, are there resources within GWC or the department to actually deliver that training?
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
Why do you say that?
I think most people are at the same sort of standard with their knowledge and experience. It would be people training each other. Whether there's a significant benefit in that, I don't know. No, I don't think so.
Now, I asked you this question in a different way before, or with a different emphasis, but putting aside any sort of formal training days or pre-commencement training, at any time during the period that you worked as a casino inspector, did anyone ever explain to you the overall regulatory purpose or objectives of the GWC?
Not that I recall.
or the regulatory purpose or objective of a casino inspector's job?
I think not in so many words, certainly in terms of what our function was and what the purpose of the activities we were undertaking was. We understood those purposes, I think, and they were explained to us.
Can you just explain to me what was explained to you?
So in respect of different functions, our role was and still is around assuring the integrity of the casino gaming operations. So the auditability, transparency, fairness of games, the reporting of revenue and tax, and ensuring that those are reported and collected correctly. Those sorts of things.
We'll come back to that and
Sure.
have a look at that a little later on. But do casino inspectors that commence work these days, by which I mean in the last few years, do they have those things, those regulatory purposes or objectives explained to them when they come on board?
It's certainly explained to them when they get down to those task levels and the programs that they run. The programs, would outline why we're doing this and what the objectives of that are. Yes, I think that's true. Noting, of course, that we don't actually have specific casino inspectors anymore. It's part of a broader role.
Understood. I'll come back to that in a minute as well. Now, you make the point at paragraph 17 of your witness statement that the functions of a casino inspector remain largely unchanged since you were one back in the 90s.
Yep.
Now, you mention at paragraph 14 that inspectors carry out inspections and audits and prepare inspections, it reports on those inspections and audits. Can I ask you first about inspections? And can you just explain to me in the broad what inspections are undertaken and how?
So you're talking specifically about inspections as distinct from other activities.
Yes.
So for me, an inspection is a cut-down version of an audit. It is a quick preliminary look at a particular activity or function rather than going through the whole audit process. So we would have inspections of all manner of things, from things like the documentation and around opening and closing table games, staffing levels in security and surveillance, all manner of things.
And are they typically, those inspections typically done physically at the Perth Casino or off-site?
No, physically, yeah.
And what is the purpose of those inspections?
They're a short, sharp look at a particular activity rather than going through a whole audit process.
But what are you looking for?
Breaches of internal control policy and procedures.
And is that a reference when you say internal control policies and procedures to the casino manuals?
Yes, it is.
And just to understand, those casino manuals are like a very large live document
Yes.
that traverses the entirety of the casino operations.
That's right.
And that's maintained by the department?
They are Crown's documents, but they are approved by the Gaming and Wagering Commission.
And does the department have live access to those documents?
Yes, they do.
And they're quite prescriptive, aren't they?
They're very prescriptive.
And detailed about the procedures and processes that Perth Casino must follow in relation to all aspects of casino operation.
In relation to all aspects of gaming and gaming-related operations, yeah.
Well, casino operation, would you agree in the sense that it deals with such things as surveillance and security, those sorts of things on the premises,
Yes,
not just limited to surveillance and security of games?
Yep.
Would you agree?
I agree.
And so the inspections are a quick, is it right to say preliminary look at whether or not those procedures are being followed in the casino manuals?
They're a quick, I agree they're a quick look. They're not necessarily, in all cases, a preliminary look because something may not follow. But yes, they are a quick look to ensure compliance in particular discrete and specific areas.
So would it be fair to say that the inspection is the quick look to see if a red flag is raised?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment.
And do you then proceed to the audit stage when you detect a red flag or a possible red flag?
We would if we detected a red flag or possible red flag, but that's not the only trigger for audit. Audit can happen without an inspection happening as well.
All right, I'll ask you some
Yep,
questions
sure.
about the audits in a moment, but just to finish
Yep.
off on the inspections, is it the position that inspections are not undertaken for the purpose of detecting signs of possible or potential money laundering? Are inspections ever undertaken for the purpose of detecting indications of possible or potential money laundering? No. Have they ever been?
Not to my knowledge.
Have inspections ever been undertaken for the purpose of detecting signs of possible, potential or potential criminal activity of any other kind?
No.
Now, the audits.
Yep.
I'm sorry if this sounds a little repetitive,
Yeah.
but it's so that we get the evidence on the transcript later and we can, for the Commissioner's benefit. How would you explain the purpose of an audit?
I think to explain the purpose of the audit, it's probably good just to have a picture of what it is we're trying to achieve. So with the casino and the casino manuals, we have a control framework that's developed. So we have very strong controls. They're prescriptive. They tell the casino how they must do certain things. They cover all aspects. So as an example, I'd probably give table games. So the controls that are in place over that include controls over surveillance. So who watches the game physically in person, who's there, how many of those people need to be there, what their supervision is, what the level of electronic surveillance is in terms of closed circuit TV, who's conducting the game, have they gone through probity, that is their licence, they've gone through probity, we understand their training regime, they've been certified to have done that, their supervision, the people who supervise them have also gone through that. Then there are the rules, the procedures, and the other documents that dictate how the game is actually played. And then there's controls over the equipment, who supplied it, what standards it has to meet. So all of those things are prescribed in the manuals. The purpose of an audit is to test those controls. So audits are broken down into specific small parts, and each audit tests those controls to see that they are effective and whether or not the casino is actually complying with them.
And if we can just stay with the example that you've given, appreciating that because the procedure, the casino manual operates over a very diverse range of casino operations, can you just give us some sense of how one would actually go about an audit of the table games that you've just described?
So an audit of a table game could take a lot of different forms. There would be a number of audits. It wouldn't be one audit of a table game. So an audit of a table game might be an audit of the rules of the game. So an inspector would actually physically witness the game being conducted for a period of time, and our audits are checklists of things that they need to evidence, observe and document. And they would be, they're quite simple in terms of they are checking that each of the employees who are dealing or conducting this game are actually conducting it in accordance with the rules.
And are any audits ever conducted in respect of the Perth Casino's books of account?
Revenue and tax. So there are revenue audits and audits of the tax calculation. So revenue audits would happen on a frequent basis. Yeah.
And do they occur physically on Perth Casino's premises?
Yes, they do.
Right. And is that in a physical paper form or by...
No, it's generally in a physical paper form. It's following the documentation.
So the books of account are held in hard copy format?
They're reports usually produced by information
I
systems.
see. So the audit doesn't condescend to the granular level of actually auditing individual entries?
No, it doesn't.
Right.
And generally we would do that for a period, be it a day or a month, and verifying those figures for that period.
So the purpose of auditing the books of account, you say, is for revenue and tax. That's in order. The objective of that is to ensure that Perth Casino is paying the state and GWC all of the licence fees and tax that it should be paying?
Well, not licence fees, so licence fees are something different, but yes, all of the tax and the levies that they're required to pay.
Do you ever audit the payment of licence fees?
We calculate the licence fee and invoice for the licence fee. So we don't audit it, we actually calculate it, provide Crown with an invoice and they pay it. We send them the bill. That's
Understood.
right.
Now, are audits ever conducted for the purpose of detecting signs of possible or potential money laundering?
No,
Have they ever been?
not to my knowledge.
Have audits ever been conducted for the purpose of detecting signs of possible or potential criminal activity of any other kind?
No, not to my knowledge.
And are audits only conducted on the premises of Perth Casino, or can they also be conducted off-site?
If the documents are available to us, they can be conducted off-site. I can't think of an example at the moment. No.
You're just anticipating my
Sorry.
question. I was about to ask you, can you think of an example of an off-site audit?
No.
Right. Coming back to inspections, are they ever conducted randomly?
Yes. So randomly in the casino licensee not knowing about them? Or?
Well, there's two parts to my question. First of all, randomly in the sense that they're not a regular programmed inspection.
Yes.
And what's the basis upon which you decide whether or not to hold a random inspection?
So this will probably come back to other issues, but my view now is that they are conducted more randomly than programmed because of other priorities and other functions and tasks that inspectors and others undertake. They are probably more random than programmed now.
Right. Do you mean by that because casino inspectors have to do work in other regulatory areas, they can't commit their resources to a regular program of inspections?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Right. Yes.
Are those inspections ever conducted without notice to Perth Casino?
More often than not.
What about audits?
More often than not.
Without notice?
Yes.
Right. And also randomly?
Yes.
And predominantly randomly these days?
Yes, I think so.
And that's a question of resources that dictates that?
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other functions or duties casino inspectors carry out these days besides audits and inspections?
I think they would be infrequent, but from time to time they would also investigate what I would call minor breaches of legislation. They would, some cheating type offences or re-entry of barred persons into the casino. They can deal with those matters by infringement notice if they're there.
And do they have a proactive role in investigating such minor breaches, or do they just wait till, for example, Perth Casino brings such potential minor breaches to their attention?
The latter, they wait until they're brought to their attention. Yeah.
Thank you. Who do casino inspectors report to within GWC or the department?
Within the department, they report to a senior inspector and then to a director.
Do they report directly to anyone at GWC?
No.
And the person to whom the casino inspectors report, the senior inspector, does that person, the senior inspector, oversee the casino inspector's work on a regular basis?
Yes.
To make sure that it's been undertaken properly?
Yes.
And does that person give the casino inspectors directions as to how to perform their work?
That person allocates the work. I don't know if they give directions on how to perform it. I don't think so. I think that work is allocated and then he would review the outcomes of those.
So are there some procedures or policies in writing that tell the casino inspectors exactly what they have to do?
The audit programs are quite descriptive and prescriptive. They tell casino inspectors what they have to do. They also contain preamble that's available to the inspectors to read and understand how that fits into a broader context. But I'm not aware of any specific policies that tell them how to do that.
Right, but there is an audit program that's in writing?
Yes.
And that's what the inspectors follow?
Yes.
What do they follow in relation to the inspections? Is there an equivalent inspections program?
Yes, there is.
Right, and in writing?
in writing.
And these are department documents?
Yes, they are.
Are they GWC documents?
No, I wouldn't call them GWC documents.
Why not?
Because they're developed by the department, used by the department, and generally the GWC wouldn't see those, nor do they approve those.
I asked you before about whether the senior inspector gives the casino inspectors any directions about their work, and you answered no, and then went on to explain. Does the chief casino officer give the casino inspectors directions about their work?
No.
Anybody else?
From time to time, they may be. I know that from time to time, I have asked for revenue audits to be completed, but not as the Chief Casino Officer, I don't think, as the Deputy Director General, but no.
When you say you don't think, why do you say that?
Because that's not part of the role as the Chief Casino Officer, as I understand it.
All right, we'll come back to that.
Yep.
You mentioned at paragraph 17 of your witness statement that casino inspectors now carry out activities in other regulatory areas
Yes.
besides casino regulation. Since when has that occurred?
I think that was, certainly it started before 2015, but I think around 2015 was probably the time when that really kicked off. It sort of coincided with the time when there was no longer a permanent presence of inspectors at the casino.
And is it your view that that position, that situation has been exacerbated by the machinery of government changes, such that they're stretched across diverse areas even more than they were in 2015?
No, probably not. I mean, prior to machinery of government changes, casino inspectors had become more general inspectors, so they were doing work in liquor and community gaming and across wagering. That I don't believe has changed significantly since machinery of government. They are still doing that. Yeah.
But let me ask you this question. That move from being dedicated casino inspectors to being more general regulatory inspectors, if we can put it that way, in your view, does that leave those inspectors enough time to do all the work they need to do as casino inspectors?
Yes, it does.
All right, thank you. Now, paragraph 18 of your witness statement, you mentioned that you were appointed a senior regulatory officer in May 2000.
Yep, correct.
And that's obviously a departmental appointment.
Yes, it is.
So you moved from casino inspector to senior regulatory officer, which looks on the face of how you've described it in your witness statement as a significant promotion in terms of the number of levels in the public sector levels, such as they are, that you moved through at that time.
I believe it was a 3 to a 6.
Yes. And is that regarded in public service terms as a significant promotion?
Honestly, I don't know.
Now, you stayed in that position for almost 3 years until March 2005, yes?
Yes.
And I gather from paragraph 19 of your witness statement that you had a team of 3 to 4 other regulatory officers you reported to.
That's correct.
Is there still a regulatory team like that in the department
No,
today?
there's not.
Is there a substitute?
No, there's not. So part of the regulatory team functions have been taken elsewhere into a policy and legislation area, but no, there's no substitute.
All right. Now, just in terms of your responsibilities as a senior regulatory officer, if we can just pull up paragraph 21, please, at page 0004. And yes, it's on 2 pages. So is that large enough for you to see on the screen?
I can see it, yes.
Mr. Connolly? Excellent. So just at the bottom of page 004, thank you. Isn't that clever? There we go. You describe over onto the next page in subparagraphs what you were responsible for. And I wanted to ask you in particular about paragraph D, managing risks at activity level. Before we go to what you were talking about in relation to activity level, which you subsequently go on to explain in your statement, I'll just ask you what risks you're referring to there.
So with games, table or electronic security surveillance activities, when we developing those control frameworks and determining what we would like to have in the policy and the procedures manual. We look at the risks of non-compliance, the things that can go wrong in those particular activities. That's what I'm referring to when I talk about the activity level. So that would be an assessment of a particular activity. What can go wrong? What can we do to mitigate the risks of that happening and build those into the control framework?
But the going wrong is essentially non-compliance with the casino manual in some respect.
These are probably before they get to the casino manual. These are what do we need to put in the casino manual to mitigate what we see as the risks at this activity.
All right, so what is the type of thing that could, to use your words, go wrong that you're trying to mitigate?
I guess in a table game context. Cards, for example, minor things, cards not being shuffled randomly, being dealt incorrectly, someone not having appropriate training, those sorts of things.
I see. So let's go to paragraph 22 and we might be able to get a bit of allow you to elaborate on that a little further. So you had said at 21 you were managing risks at activity level, and then at 22 you kindly go on to explain what activity level is, what you mean by that at 21, describing it as the individual activities at the casino which include the activity of security. So using that language of what could go wrong that had to be managed in the activity of security?
Again, with people, training, knowledge, experience, making sure that as part of our control framework that all those things were covered, and we had certification that we had the right people, that they had they were suitable in terms of probity and their experience. Other things that could go wrong for security, they transfer and move assets from different places in the casino, ensuring those procedures were in place for that there was surveillance coverage for those sorts of things, minimising the risks of the loss of those assets.
Can you give me an example of an asset that you're referring to
Chips would be an asset. So the security officers would move gaming chips from gaming tables to main cage to chip banks and to and from.
All right, thank you. Let's go to B. What sorts of things could go wrong in relation to the activity of surveillance that you wanted to mitigate?
Manual procedures would be something that we would be making sure was available. So what happens if the surveillance system doesn't operate? How do we deal with that? Again, making sure that we've got people with appropriate skills, knowledge and experience who are sitting in the chairs watching those games.
So it's surveillance of the table games that you're referring to?
Of the table games and the conduct of those related activities. So again, surveillance would not just watch table games, they'd also watch security and other things happening, chip bank.
I see. So in the example you gave under the heading of security activity, proper surveillance of the movement of chips from one area of the casino to the other. Understood. Now the risks in C, the risks associated with the activity of the main cage, what could go wrong there?
So again, I come back primarily to people, knowledge, skills and experience, but we have had instances where things have been stolen from the cage. So procedures such as clearing of hands, showing cameras that hands are cleared, having processes in place to ensure that what happens in the cage is auditable and transparent, and we can review those if we need to.
And just for those listening, can you explain what the cage is and what its purpose is?
Sure. So the cage is essentially the casino bank. It, for want of a better explanation, it takes in cash from players and hands them chips. It also ensures that tables are stocked with chips. So there's movement of chips backwards and forwards from tables.
So just to be clear, what is it that you're watching there in the cage? What's of concern to you?
The chips are of concern to us, as is the movement of cash, because all of that cash is that is counted, that is dropped at casino tables, goes into account process and comes back into the cage. So it's actually all the money that is transacted through the casino.
But are you interested in it from a taxation and revenue perspective or from some other perspective?
Primarily from taxation and revenue, because the movement of chips is used in the calculation of revenue. But from every other perspective,
What are the other perspectives?
From security and trying to limit the opportunities for cash and chips to go missing.
Why is that a problem?
Again, because if they're going missing from in the cage, we have people in there that we don't want or to be involved in that. If they're going to steal something, we definitely. But again, it comes back to revenue and tax. All of those things impact on revenue and tax.
And now, last one is table games and electronic games.
Mm-hmm.
You may have already, to an extent, answered this, but if we can just finish off that series of questions. What could go wrong in relation to the activity of table games or the activities of table games and electronic games that you wanted to?
Table games, again, are procedures around ensuring the integrity and auditability of that game. So it is about people, it's how the game's played. It's ensuring that it is, I'll use the word fair, but it's played in accordance with the rules. So how the game is played and conducted is transparent to customers. Electronic games is, again, it's pretty much the same sorts of principles, but instead of having a person, we have a chip that operates the game. So we limit and control access to gaming machines and who gets access to those, to the chips and software for machines.
Now,
Sorry, the chip you're referring to there is a computer chip.
It is a computer chip.
As opposed to a
gambling chip. Yes, that's correct.
Now, in all of these activities here at 2020, at 22, at the activity level, you're not managing the risk of possible or potential money laundering occurring at or being facilitated by Perth Casino.
No, we're not.
And you're not managing the risk of possible or potential criminal activity of any other kind occurring at or being facilitated by the Perth Casino.
No, we're not.
And just so that I can be clear, if we go back to 21, please. Thank you. In terms of little a, and A through to C, maintaining and developing the audit and regulatory plans, etc., as you read out there, A through to C, were all the risks that we've just been talking about managed primarily through the implementation of inspection and audit programs?
Yes, they were.
And yes, thank you. And if we can just put 21 back into the document, please. Little b, you say reporting on matters including revenue, taxation and progress against key performance indicators. Do you see that there?
Yes, yes.
Can I just understand whose performance was being measured by the KPI?
They were Gaming and Wagering Commission KPIs. I guess technically the Gaming and Wagering Commission's performance was being measured by those KPIs, although the work was being conducted by departmental officers.
All right, and performance as to what?
In terms of numbers of audits and inspections that need to be carried out.
I see. Who did you report to in your position as Senior Regulatory Officer?
I think the Director of Operations at the time.
And who did they report to?
Director General.
And did the Director of Operations oversee and supervise your work?
Yes.
And did you have any responsibility in your role as Senior Regulatory Officer to supervise the work of casino inspectors?
No.
In your role as Senior Regulatory Officer, was it ever explained to you what the overall regulatory purpose or purposes of the GWC were?
No.
When you're involved in this role as Senior Regulatory Officer, did you have as part of your duties a role in developing policy for GWC?
Not that I recall, no.
Or policy for the department in relation to casino regulation?
Not that I recall. It was about the development of audit and inspection programs.
Now, paragraph 24 of your witness statement, you tell us about your promotion to the position of Manager of Inspections, or have I assumed too much? Was that a promotional position?
It was a promotion, yes.
And you held that role between 2005 and 2007?
Yep.
Just look at paragraph 27. You say, in about 2005, I took on additional responsibilities and my role changed. But at 24, you say that you actually commenced this role in about 2005. We just put 27 back so Mr. Connolly can see 24 and 27 together. You say from 30 March 05 at 24, I was employed as a Manager of Inspections. And then at 27, you say in about 2005, I took on additional responsibilities and my role changed.
I think what I'm referring to there is additional responsibilities in terms of things other than just casino related things, so community gaming and liquor. It was at around about that time when those functions were largely amalgamated.
So does that then marry with what you've said at paragraph 32? The ultimate effect of the change was that I went from spending all of my time on casino-related matters to approximately 30% of my time
Yes.
casino-related matters. I understand,
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So was it the case that from the time you joined the department in 1990,
Yeah.
you were actually full-time on board, through to 2005, you had been exclusively dedicated to casino regulation?
That's how I recall that,
And it
yes.
was 2005 when the role was brought
Or thereabouts, yeah.
And was that because of department amalgamations?
I think that's what that was for. I don't recall exactly why, but it was at the time when all of those functions were amalgamated, yeah.
And so that broadening of regulatory role for you, was that mirrored for everybody else who had previously been involved in casino regulation?
Yes.
At the same time?
Yes. It did start earlier for some trialled it, but ultimately for everybody.
Now, paragraph 26 of your witness statement, and we can pull that out, please. You describe what you were responsible for as Manager of Inspections. Could you just explain to me in very simple terms how that differed from your previous role as Senior Regulatory Officer?
So as Senior Regulatory Officer, primarily I was responsible for the development and maintenance of audit programs and understanding and actioning any outcomes for those audit and inspection programs. As Manager of Inspections, I became responsible for inspectors and ultimately allocating the work that they did.
So you oversaw the work of the casino
Yes, I did.
inspectors in this role, whereas
Yes.
previously you hadn't. And previously you reported to the Director of Operations. Who did you report to in this role?
It was the Director. I'm just unclear of what the title was. It was Operations or Compliance, but it was the
So
Director.
not Director General?
No, not Director General.
Or Deputy Director General?
No.
A director?
A Director.
Who's, is a Director one level under a Deputy Director?
In those days of racing, gaming and liquor, there was no Deputy Director General. There's a Director General and Directors.
Okay, so they were just one below Director
Yeah.
General. I understand. Now, paragraph 33 of your witness statement, you then moved to the position of Director of Compliance from 2007 to 2010. Was that another promotion
Yes, it was.
for you? And was that again across a range of regulatory areas, or was it now back limited to casino?
No, it's a range of regulatory areas.
At para 35, you explain the change of role was due to a corporate restructure, and then you go on to explain the key differences between that role and your previous role. And one you mentioned is a greater delegation of power. From whom, Mr. Connolly?
Gaming Wagering Commission, I believe.
In relation to which powers?
In relation to the powers to approve and to deal with matters that the Gaming Wagering Commission would normally undertake themselves.
You also talk about in little b, the development of policy. What kind of policies are you referring to there?
So I'm talking about the development of policy to that subsequently would be approved by the Gaming Wagering Commission in relation to things such as community gaming operations, the conduct of poker events, bingo, those sorts of things, policy to guide external stakeholders in how to conduct things.
In that role, did anyone ever explain to you the overall regulatory purpose or purposes of the GWC?
No.
And did you have a role in developing any policy that reflected the overall regulatory purpose or purposes of the GWC?
No, I don't believe so.
You mentioned in little b also that you attended GWC meetings as an advisor.
Yep.
Advisor in relation to what?
In relation to specific agenda items that were being considered by the GWC.
But what was the nature of those agenda items upon which you typically advised?
Casino-related matters that might be in relation to changes to table games, a new table game, changes to security policies and procedures, any manner of submission really from the casino I could be asked to attend and advise.
And were you the only departmental officer attending to advise the GWC at those meetings, or were there others?
No, I think others attended. I don't have a specific recollection of who and when, but I think others attended, and certainly, obviously, the Director General was there as the chairman as well.
But did others who attended, other departmental officers, did they have an advisory role such as you had?
If departmental officers were going, typically they were going to provide advice on a specific paper, yes.
So just in terms of then looking at it from a point of view of a number of, more than one departmental officer attending GWC meetings to give advice, can you explain what the limits of your advisory function were compared to others? Who would advise typically in relation to what?
Well, when I was going to those meetings, I was there to advise on a specific matter. Now, sometimes that would involve me being called in to talk about that matter and then leaving. Other times I would stay there for the duration of the meeting. But that would be controlled by the chairman.
Right, but the sorts of matters you advised on and the sorts of matters other people within the department advised on, what was the demarcation?
Compliance, new submissions, licensing. So the demarcation would be licensing and compliance type issues. So
What was your area?
compliance,
And not licensing?
not licensing at the time.
And not what else?
Probably not much else. Probably licensing.
Okay. And to whom did you report in this role of Director of Compliance?
Director General.
And who reported to you? Who were your direct reports?
In that position, there would have been a senior inspector and a manager of inspections, I think. I think that's what they would have been.
Now, can we move to the 7th of May 2007? That's the first time you were appointed the Chief Casino Officer. You say paragraph 36.
Yep.
And just to be clear, when you were first appointed in 2007, you did not at that time hold the position of Deputy Director General of the department, did
No.
you? Okay. Who appointed you to the position of Chief Casino Officer?
I don't recall.
Do you remember getting any formal document of appointment?
No, I would have got a letter of appointment, I think, but I don't remember.
Or who it was from?
Or who it was from,
I
yeah.
understand. Now, you held that position of Chief Casino Officer on the first occasion until 2010 when you went and did a job at the Fisheries
That's right.
Department. And did you formally relinquish the Chief Casino Officer role at that time?
I don't recall that there was a process for formally relinquishing. I stopped becoming an authorised officer. That authorisation, as I understand it, was revoked, and I think that had the effect of relinquishing that position as well.
Do you recall whether the person who stepped into the role of Chief Casino Officer did so on a permanent or temporary basis?
I don't know.
Was it envisaged you were going to come back to the role of Chief Casino Officer when you went to Fisheries?
When I went to Fisheries, yes, I think it was. It was a secondment for a specified period of time.
For how long?
I believe it was 6 months.
And then it went on a bit longer than
A bit
that.
longer than that, yeah.
Because you returned, I think, to the department in June 2012.
Yes, that sounds right, correct.
And you were then appointed to the position of Deputy Director General.
That's right.
And then on the 3rd of July 2012, you were appointed again as Chief Casino Officer.
That's correct.
And can we just pull up this document, GWC.0001.007.0182. Unsigned, but that looks like the appointment that
It does.
was made. Is there any other document of appointment of you as Chief Casino Officer, whether at this time or any time subsequently, that you're aware of, where the appointer was GWC rather than the Director General of the department?
No.
Or any document of appointment of you as Chief Casino Officer by the Director General, but in his capacity as Chairman of GWC?
No, not that I'm aware of.
I'm not sure if that document's already been tendered, Mr. Commissioner, but if not, I tendered that document. You want me to read out the number again?
The document, which is the appointment of Chief, excuse me, appointment of Chief Casino Officer bearing the document identifier GWC.0001.0007.0182 is admitted into evidence as an exhibit.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, at the commencement of either of your appointments as Chief Casino Officer, 2007 or 2012, did anybody outline to you what your duties were as a Chief Casino Officer?
No.
Were you given any statement of duties or responsibilities?
As Chief Casino Officer? No.
Now, you were appointed by the Minister, the responsible Minister, as the Deputy Chairperson of the GWC on the 18th of July 2000.
Yes.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
Call up PUB.0005.001.001, which is the Government Gazette for the 24th of July 2012. If we go to page 0014, right down the bottom there, where it says Gaming and Wagering Commission Act, thank you. That's the gazettal of your appointment as Deputy Chairperson of the GWC.
Yes.
Do you know if that appointment has been revoked?
No, I don't.
I tender the Government Gazette, Mr. Commissioner.
The Government Gazette, with the notation of the 18th of July 2012, with the document identifier PUB.0005.0001.0001, admitted into evidence as an exhibit.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, I'm giving you a forewarning, Mr. Connolly. I'm about to ask you some questions about some instruments of delegation that are relevant to the role that you had. And I want to be clear that I'm not sure I have the full suite of instruments, so I might be showing you one that's been superseded or it's been revoked, or you're aware of one that I'm not aware of. So I want you to understand the questions I'm putting to you with that caveat.
Okay.
You understand what I'm putting to you?
I think so.
All right, now we call up GWC.0001.007.0175. And if we could just zoom in, please, so it's a little clearer. Thank you. Now, this is an instrument of delegation. We'll go down to who's signed it in a moment. But it's a delegation to the Chairman of the GWC with effect from 18 December 2012 relevantly for our purposes, all of the Commission's powers under the Casino Control Act other than the power of delegation itself. If you just go down to the bottom of the document, please, you see that it's signed by the chairman and various, presumably, members of the GWC. My question is this: were you made aware of that instrument of delegation to the chairman on or about the date it was executed?
That's my signature at the top.
At the... Oh, I see.
As Deputy Chairman.
Thank you. Now, I tender that document,
The
Commissioner.
the document, which is delegation of powers, with the document identifier GWC.0001.0007.0175 is admitted into evidence as an exhibit.
And you may or may not know the answer to this question. This is my knowledge deficit displayed to its full, Mr. Connolly. Do you know whether that instrument of delegation has been revoked or substituted, or whether it remains in force?
I don't. I'm sorry.
Call up GWC.0001.0007.0183. Now, same date, delegation to Deputy Chairman, say Chairperson, in similar terms, if not the same terms, and you were holding that position at that time. Were you made aware of this instrument of delegation on or about the date that it was prepared?
Again, I was at the meeting, obviously, and I signed that, so yes.
You signed it?
Yes, I've signed that one as well.
Can we go down?
Mm-hmm.
Can we go down to the document, please? I see. You've signed an instrument of delegation of powers to you.
Along with every other member, yeah.
Not the chairperson?
Obviously, I'd suggest to you the chairperson wasn't at that meeting. I don't recall it, but...
Did you think it was appropriate to sign your own instrument of delegation?
I don't recall what I was thinking at that meeting, but with all of the other signatures there, I probably would have thought that that was okay.
Just reflecting now?
It seems odd.
And why does it seem odd to you?
Because it's a delegation to myself.
All right, I tender that document, Commissioner.
The delegation of powers dated the 18th of December 2012, bearing the document identifier GWC.0001.0007.0183 is admitted into evidence as an exhibit.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, just on that instrument of delegation that's on the screen, again, have you any recollection or knowledge as to whether that instrument has been revoked or substituted?
I don't know if it's been revoked or substituted, but there is another delegation to myself as the Deputy Director General with the same powers.
We'll come to that, but
Yeah.
I'm just interested in the delegation in your capacity as Deputy Chairman.
No, I don't know.
Now, if we go, skip quickly back to your witness statement at paragraph 78 at page 0010. So we've looked at your delegation as Deputy Chairperson, and you're talking about something else here, but
Yeah.
I'm not not interested in that context, but am interested in your statement that all of the powers of the GWC have been delegated to the Chief Casino Officer and the Deputy Director General, save for the power of delegation itself. That's how you recall it.
That's how I recall it. Yep.
All right. Now, if we go to GWC.0001.0007.0184. Now, this is a delegation of all of the powers under relevantly the Casino Control Act to the holder of the position of Deputy Director General, which at 28 April 2020 was you.
Yes, correct.
Can you tell me, if you know, whether you had any such general delegation before April 2020?
I don't recall, sorry.
And if we just I'm being facetious. Do you have your fingerprints on that one or not?
No, sorry, no.
Okay, all good. Now, can you tell me, if you know, what the purpose was of GWC delegating its powers under the Casino Control Act to you generally, other than the power of delegation itself? In your capacity as Deputy Director General?
The purpose of that?
Yes.
Well, Gaming Wagering Commission only meets monthly, so there are matters that need to be dealt with in between meetings. So that delegation of power gave me the ability to deal with those on behalf of the Gaming Wagering Commission.
But why to you in your position as Deputy Director General? Sorry, I'll just finish the question for the transcript.
Sorry.
I understand you thought I'd finished, that's fine. Why not in your position as Deputy Chairperson of GWC or in your position as Chief Casino Officer? So that's the focus of my question. Why as Deputy Director General?
I don't know.
I tender that document, Commissioner.
The document, which is a delegation of powers dated the 28th of April 2020, and bearing the document identifier GWC.0001.0007.0184 is admitted into evidence as an exhibit.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, in relation to the delegation to the Chief Casino Officer, Mr. Ord attached an instrument of delegation relevant to that to his witness statement for the purposes of him giving evidence before the Royal Commission, and I'll ask that that be called up now. GWC.0001.0007.0176. Now, this replaces, as it says in the blueprint at the top, an instrument of delegation that was dated 16 December 2014. And I'll come back to the content of the delegation in a minute, but if we can just go down to the bottom and see the date. It should have another page. Yes, thank you. It's dated June 2017. So my first question is, to your knowledge, is that the latest instrument of delegation to the holder of the Office of Chief Casino Officer?
I don't know.
Thank you. Now let's go back up and look at the body of the delegation. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, just before we leave the execution clause. Have you signed that or not?
Have I? No.
No,
No.
thank you. Then we go up to the body of the delegation, and you'll see that quite differently from the other two delegation instruments that I showed you, for the holder of the Deputy Director General position and the holder of the Deputy Chairperson position, this isn't a general delegation of powers under Casino Control Act, but rather specific ones. See that?
Yes.
Can you explain, if you know, the purpose of giving the Chief Casino Officer a more limited delegation than the Deputy Chairperson or the Director General? I'll just finish the question, recognising that at the time, practically, that was all the one person.
No. You're correct, it was the one person, it was me.
Yes.
So I don't see the purpose of this.
I tender that instrument of delegation, Commissioner.
The delegation of powers dated the 27th of June 2017, bearing the identifier GWC.0001.0007.0176 is admitted into evidence as an exhibit.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, so we've seen the instruments of delegation, and when we look at your role that you had from the time of your appointment as Deputy Director General back in 2012, and that proceeds until sometime early in 2021, doesn't it?
That's correct.
And we'll come back later to that issue about you no longer being the Chief Casino Officer. But it's clear that you held three roles: Deputy Chairperson, Deputy Director of GWC, Deputy Director General of the Department and Chief Casino Officer, and you held them all simultaneously.
Correct.
When you were involved, if I can use this generic expression, in casino regulation in Western Australia, did you distinguish in your own mind between the separate roles of Deputy Director being involved in casino regulation, Deputy Chairperson being involved in casino regulation, and Chief Casino Officer?
Yes, I think I did. So Deputy Chairperson for me is a role that's really only an active role when the chairperson's not available to attend Gaming and Wagering Commission meetings. So I don't see that I was acting in that position at any other time. And
I'm sorry, just so
Yep.
that it's because
Yep.
I don't want you to think later that I'm trying to trip you up. Just want you to clarify something about that answer while it comes to mind. I think it's paragraph 84 of your witness statement. If we can have a quick look at that. Yes, at page 0049. Not much use to you, is it? Maybe to move things along, what we can do, Mr. Connolly, is I might ask you to defer your answer to that question until I can show you another passage of your evidence so that you can answer it having regard to what you've said previously. So you were talking about your role as Deputy Chairperson. Let's put that to one side. Perhaps you can answer this question in a more limited way. Did you distinguish in your mind between your role as Deputy Director General of the Department and your role as Chief Casino Officer?
no, not really. Generally, I act and do act as the Deputy Director General. My title is actually Deputy Director General Regulation within that structure.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Who did you report to in your role as Chief Casino Officer?
Gaming and Wagering Commission.
Not the Director General?
The Director General is the chair of the Gaming and Wagering Commission, so if there was something, and I can't think of an example, but if there was something in between meetings, I would talk to the Director General about that if I was acting as the Chief Casino Officer.
In his capacity as chairperson or in his capacity as Director General of the Department?
No, I think capacity as chairperson. I can't think of an example of that.
And who did you primarily take direction from in your role as Chief Casino Officer?
I don't think I had any direction in my role as Chief Casino Officer. I don't think I was directed in any way.
All right. In terms of the oversight of your function as Chief Casino Officer, can we take you to paragraph 70 of your witness statement, page 0009? Put that back, please, just so I can show Mr. Connolly the context of what he's saying here. Paragraph 68, you begin to talk about oversight of the Chief Casino Officer, and you describe you're not aware of any formal oversight. And then you say at 69, however, practice I adopted was to ensure relevant stakeholders were always aware of my activities. And you say the relevant stakeholders were GWC and the Director General. Do you mean the Director General in his capacity as chairperson of the GWC, or the Director General in his capacity as Director General of the Department?
No, I think in his capacity as the chairman of the GWC, the things I was dealing with as the Chief Casino Officer would not have been of interest to the DG, to the Director General of the Department.
Let's just stay with 71, with question of oversight and go to 71. You're now looking at GWC oversight of your function as CCO. You say you attended monthly GWC meetings. Now, this was the point I wanted to take you to before.
Yeah.
Paragraph 84 at page 0011. And we pop that out. Throughout my time as the Deputy Director General, I attended monthly meetings as the Deputy Chairperson. See? Is that
Yes.
right?
No, I don't think that's correct.
All right.
I did attend meetings as the Deputy Chairperson when the Chairman was not there. When the Chairman is there, I am not the Deputy Chairperson, I'm Deputy Director General. That is not correct.
So let me understand that. If the chairperson were attending a GWC meeting, did you attend the whole of the meeting,
Yes.
but not in the capacity of deputy chairperson?
Or any formal capacity, more as an advisor.
Right, but you were there for the whole meeting?
Yes.
I see. And did you distinguish between the times where you were, when the chairperson was absent and when he wasn't, the different roles that you had at the meeting? Or did you think your role was always the same?
No, I distinguished, and I think the meetings, the minutes would reflect that as well. Where I was there as a deputy chairperson, there as a deputy chairperson. Where I was there as the deputy director general, that's what the minutes reflected as well, and I understood that.
All right. So let me come back to that question I wanted to ask you before. What's the distinction between your role as chief casino officer and your role as deputy chairperson of GWC?
What's the distinction?
Yeah, how are those roles different, if they are?
Well, the chief casino officer role is a very limited role. For me, that revolves around licensing, casino employee licensing functions within the department. As a deputy chairperson, I'm stepping in and filling in for the chairperson of the GWC meetings when he's not available.
And is that all your role as deputy chairperson was?
In meetings to attend
Just
those meetings.
generally? No, I'm asking about...
That's how I understood my role. Yes.
But you did have this general delegation in your capacity as deputy chairperson, all of the powers of the Casino Control Act that the GWC had, except the power of delegation itself.
But I also had that in my capacity as a Deputy Director General, and that's how I understood I was exercising those.
All right, so that was going to be my next question. How did you distinguish between your role as deputy chairperson and your role as Deputy Director General of the department involved in casino regulation?
My distinction is, in my mind, as the Deputy Chairperson, that's only a role that is, for want of a better word, active when the chairman is not at the Gaming Wagering Commission meetings and I step in for the chairman.
And what about this role as Deputy Director General of the department involved in casino regulation?
Well, it's Deputy Director General regulation, so I'm not really the Deputy Director General of the department. I'm not involved in other areas of the department, sport and rec, culture, the arts, those sorts of things. I'm Deputy Director General regulation, and my role is with the Regulatory Services Division.
What I'm particularly interested to understand is about your role in respect of casino regulation specifically. So you've got, sorry, I know I'm being a little bit repetitive, but I'm just trying to get some clarity here. So you've got that deputy chair role in GWC.
Yes.
You've got your chief casino officer role, which you've just described as more limited.
Yes.
Deputy chairperson's just going to the meetings in the absence of the chairperson. So what was the role that you had as Deputy Director General in relation to casino regulation specifically?
So ultimately, I'm responsible for all of those regulatory functions, for ensuring that audits and inspections are done, for the achievement of KPIs, for all of those functions as the Deputy Director General regulation.
And who did you report to in your capacity as Deputy Director General of the department involved in casino regulation?
Director General.
In his capacity as chairperson of GWC or in his capacity as Director General of the department?
In both capacities, and I guess depending on the context and the circumstances, if there are matters around structural issues, staffing issues, budget, they would be with the Director General of the department. specific matters about the casino would be probably more with the chairman of the Gaming and Wagering Commission.
In your role as Deputy Director General of the department involved in casino regulation, did you ever take direction from the GWC?
In what respect? Can I clarify that?
Telling you had to do your job as Deputy Director General of the department involved in casino regulation in a certain way.
No. They did ask me to do things from time to time, specific jobs or specific activities, which I did, but not in a certain way.
In what capacity?
I don't know. Deputy Director General, I would assume Deputy Director General.
When you said you don't know, I'm just trying to understand how it is that you don't know.
Well, I guess if I work through this in a more logical sense, and let me try to do this, it wouldn't be as a Deputy Chairperson, because that's not the role for the Deputy Chairperson. CCO is a much more limited role, so it would be as the Deputy Director General Regulation, with the ability to direct departmental staff.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. That's 11:15, Commissioner.
Just before we break, just so I understand the nomenclature, you were stressing there a couple of times, I was Deputy Director General Regulation. Did that nomenclature ever change? I mean, were you ever simply Deputy Director General?
I don't believe so, Commissioner. It gets shortened to Deputy Director General, but my understanding is that I am the Deputy Director General Regulation.
And that's been the case since 2012?
That's correct.
All right, thank you. We'll resume at 11:30. Please be seated. Yes, Ms Cowell.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, if we can have Mr Connolly's witness statement up again, please, and turning to paragraph 73, which I think is at 0009. We pull out 73, thank you. There you're talking about the GWC monthly meetings as a good opportunity for you to engage with commissioners and provide background and so forth. Which hat were you wearing when you engaged with commissioners in the way in which you described there in paragraph 73?
Deputy Director General.
And in your capacity as Deputy Director General, who did you owe your primary duty to when you engaged with the members of the Commission in monthly meetings?
I'm not sure I understand.
So I'm just thinking of potential candidates as someone you owed a duty to, GWC or the department.
The GWC at Gaming Wagering Commission meetings, even acting in my capacity as Deputy Director General, I'm advising them about matters relating to the Gaming and Wagering Commission.
What if it was a topic, though, that touched upon resourcing, such as some additional oversight of the licensee that might be required, that could potentially, that would be a good idea, but could potentially occupy a lot of resources or require some additional funding? Where did your primary duty lay? To the GWC in recommending something that would be for the benefit of overseeing the licensee and in performance of the regulatory function, or to the department in making sure that resources were managed?
I don't recall that I've done something specifically like that in those circumstances, but what I would do is discuss that with the Director General first. That would be primarily a departmental matter first, and have a position.
And when you say consult with the Director General in his capacity as
Director
Director General, so you would get the department's view first on things and then consider the GWC's position?
I think so.
Now, just looking at these, at 72 on this page, paragraph 72, you describe what happens at these monthly meetings. You say an agenda paper would be drafted to update on approvals you had granted in respect of the casino in previous months. Now, are they approvals granted in your capacity as CCO, Chief Casino Officer?
They're actually both. So as Deputy Director General and as Chief Casino Officer, the paper would reflect any delegations I've exercised in both capacities, if there were in both capacities.
And were there agenda papers drafted by you or by other departmental staff?
Other departmental staff would
Were they
draft those.
checked by you and approved by you before being provided to the GWC members?
I would not check the detail of those. They would be made available to me and I would read them.
In what capacity? As Chief Casino Officer, Deputy Director General, or both?
As Deputy Director General.
Not as Chief Casino Officer?
No.
Did you ever reflect in your time attending GWC meetings when you were chairing in your capacity as Deputy Chairperson, whether GWC's oversight of your role as Chief Casino Officer could be inhibited by you attending as the Deputy Chairperson?
No, I didn't.
Can we go to 75, please? Paragraph 75, which is over the page. You explain some oversight. Do I understand this correctly in your role as Chief Casino Officer by the Director General? You see that?
I do.
And you're talking about oversight of your role as Chief Casino Officer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say in their roles as Director Generals, do you mean in their roles as Director Generals of the department, or in their roles as Director General in their capacity as Chairperson of the GWC?
Director General in their capacity as Chairperson of the GWC. That's where I would be reporting to them as the CCO.
Right. And why do you say that?
Because the CCO doesn't have a reporting line to the Director General.
So, Director General, as Director General of the department, what did you understand was their role, if any, in casino regulation?
In supporting the Deputy Director General regulation in providing resourcing, facilities, ensuring that KPIs were met, doing the things that the department needed to do to support the Gaming Wagering Commission.
Right. Now, if we go to paragraph 45 of your witness statement, which is at page 0007, you begin a discussion here of the role of the Chief Casino Officer as you understand it, and you describe it as an important but limited role. First of all, in what way do you mean that it was important?
It's important, as I understand the role of CCO, important in the licensing of casino employees and casino key employees. So without the CCO role, those would have to be approved by the Gaming and Wagering Commission.
Or couldn't you use your delegated powers as Deputy Chairperson?
No, regulations require this Chief Casino Officer to do those things. The licensing of employee regulations.
Right, so absent a repeal or amendment of the regulations, that's the position. Chief
Yes.
Casino Officer has to do those. I
Yeah.
understand. In what way was the role of CCO limited?
My understanding of the role of CCO that it didn't have a great deal of other powers under any of the legislation. Powers to delegate. There wasn't much that there was for the CCO to delegate. To release information to other regulatory authorities. And really that's where it probably ended for me, and certainly in my understanding of the CCO role, that's all that CCO position did, and it primarily was around licensing of employees.
You had a number of delegated powers as Chief Casino Officer, didn't you?
I did.
Including delegation of the power to issue directions to the licensee under Section 24 of the Casino Control Act.
I did.
So it wasn't just limited to licensing.
But I also had those powers as the Deputy Director General as well.
How did you have those powers as Deputy Director General?
I believe I had the full delegation
But also as Deputy Chairperson?
as Deputy Chairperson as well.
So I guess this comes back to the question of why the Chief Casino Officer role was more limited. Because you're saying, because each one of you, Chief Casino Officer, Deputy Chairperson and Deputy Director General, in all those guises, you could issue directions.
I could.
So
I
why
didn't.
do you say...
I didn't, and I haven't issued directions. But primarily, I saw myself as acting as a Deputy Director General. That's the role that I saw myself acting in, rather than a CCO or as Deputy Chairperson exercising those delegations.
Did anyone ever tell you that that's how you should look at your role?
No, they did not.
And looking back now, especially because I'm asking you all these questions
Yes.
about this, have you got any insights into what your process of thinking was as to why you foregrounded the Deputy Director General role and backgrounded the Chief Casino Officer role, particularly in relation to things as like the Section 24 directions delegated power?
No. Again, I don't understand really why I had the delegation in those three positions. I probably only needed it in one position.
Which one?
I would have said the Deputy Director General, quite frankly.
Why?
Because predominantly that's what my role is and how I fit in all the other things I do. I act as the Deputy Director General on a daily basis, not CCO or Deputy Chairperson.
And just to be clear, who would you report to in that role as Deputy Director General?
Director General.
In relation to casino regulation?
In relation to casino regulation, yeah.
The Director General?
Yeah.
And just to finish off on this point, if we have a look at paragraph 47 on this page, the evidence you've just given is really put in very concise terms at paragraph 47.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yes.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
And at 48, we pull out 48, please. You say the complicating factor in distinguishing my roles is due to me being both Deputy Director General and the Chief Casino Officer. How is that a complicating factor? Because I thought you just explained you really just primarily worked as the Deputy Director General.
Well, I guess it's not unless it comes to those licensing functions. So I have to be careful when I'm performing those licensing functions. That is, approving the licensing, the issue of licences, new positions on the register, and those positions that are CCO. That I actually do those as the CCO. I don't necessarily think about that on a daily basis. Who I am, I just act as the Deputy Director General. So it complicates for me having those additional positions.
But just to be clear, what you do as a Chief Casino Officer is driven by a set of regulations.
Yes, it is.
And so that's the dividing line between that.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
What's in the regulations is CCO territory,
Yes.
and everything else is.
That's how I see it, and that's how.
Sorry, I'll just finish with the transcript.
Yeah.
Everything else is Deputy Director General.
Yes.
Save for that, if I could put it almost like this, ad hoc role in relation to Deputy Chairperson, filling in for the Chairperson of GWC.
Correct.
And just to finish off so that we're entirely clear, in relation to Deputy Chairperson, despite that broad delegation of power that you had, there were no circumstances, were there, in which you exercised power as Deputy Chairperson apart from when you were in meeting?
That's correct. Yep.
Now, if we go to paragraph 56 at page 0008, you're talking here about the actual performance of your role as Chief Casino Officer, and you're saying that it took up only a very small percentage of your workload. Would you be able to give me, I know it wouldn't be precise, but a rough estimate of the percentage of your overall time in casino regulation that the work of the CCO, Chief Casino Officer, how much that took up?
So again, Chief Casino Officer for me is a licensing role. So typically what would happen is that I would get documents prepared by departmental staff for approval of the issue of casino licences or key licences, to add new positions onto the register, that is positions that need to have licensed personnel in them. They'd come through on an ad hoc sort of basis, but if not daily, every second day or so. They would be my last priority. I would do those before I went home most nights, or leave them for, until I had the time to have a look at those. A very small percentage would be half an hour in any given day, at best.
And then if we move away from that very specific,
Yep.
the role of the CCO, and we consider the amount of time you spent on casino regulation, including the CCO work, compared to all your other regulatory work, so every other aspect of your job,
Yeah.
about what percentage are we talking there?
Again, it's hard, and this would be a guesstimate because it depends on day to day. Some days things for the casino would be a huge priority and would take, all of my attention. But if I'm going to have a guess, I'd probably say about 20%.
Now, thank you. If we go to 58, you may have already answered this question in the course of responding to my other questions. We just pull back, please, so Mr. Connolly can see the context of that statement. 57 there, when you're talking about the only time you're required to exercise your duties as Chief Casino Officer was when you were required due to legislative constraints. You're talking about regulation. I understand. And that would arise, you say, at 58, as there are a select number of matters for which only the CCO can act. Again, pursuant to the regulations.
Yes, that's correct.
And you remember that as principally licensing of key casino employees, is that right?
Casino employees and key casino employees.
And what about authorising games?
No.
Okay. And at 59, say largely the role of Chief Casino Officer would be to sign off on recommendations that had been provided to you by a director of the department. So that's one rung down from you.
That's correct.
And therefore they and people below them would marshal all the information in relation to a potential key casino employee. You wouldn't do that yourself. You would have that all fed up to you, and then you would receive a recommendation to approve or not approve and sign or not, as the case
That's
may
correct.
be.
Yep.
What I want to ask you about your position as Chief Casino Officer, understanding all the evidence you've just given about the limitations of that role, did you perceive the Chief Casino Officer role more as a titular position almost? That the department would consider the position of this very narrow decision-making process of approving key casino employees, and you brought an independent mind to bear about whether to recommend or not, but really it was simply because nobody else could sign off apart from the person that occupied that position, that was all that the Chief Casino Officer role was about, holding the office of the person who could authorise the licensed employees.
Primarily, yes.
And the real substance of your active casino regulation work was in your Deputy Director General role.
So I understood that.
Did you see your roles of Chief Casino Officer and Deputy Director General in that way when you occupied the two roles?
Yes.
And is it fair to say you saw the Chief Casino Officer as a much more formal and limited role, and your Deputy Director General role as your main casino regulatory role?
Yes, that's fair to say.
Okay. Just wanted to take you to something you say at paragraph 77 of your witness statement, which is at page 0010. And here you're discussing the interaction of the Chief Casino Officer and the GWC. And you say at 77, in my roles as Deputy Director General and Chief Casino Officer, I have two key roles. Now, given understanding the evidence that you've just given, is 77A your description of your Chief Casino Officer role, and 77B your description of your Deputy Director General role?
Yes, I think that's fair, yes.
Right. Now, your Deputy Director General role is your overarching casino regulatory role.
Mm-hmm.
We're interested in casinos, understanding you've got a broader role. And you describe that in the broad as giving effect to the wishes of the GWC. So is it a reactive role, not a proactive role?
It's both. I think it's both. It's making recommendations to the GWC, but it's also giving effect to the decisions of the GWC.
So I'm just trying to understand a piece of evidence that you gave before, because if you describe your role as in effect giving effect to the wishes of the GWC, you previously said your primary responsibility or reporting duty was to the Director General of the department in that regard.
Yes.
So you report to the Director General of the department
Yes.
in relation to giving effect to the wishes of the GWC.
I think you'll probably have to explain that to me a little
So
more.
you've described
Yeah.
at 77B generally what your role as Deputy Director General is.
Yeah.
And that's giving effect to the wishes of GWC. Yeah?
Yep.
And in doing that, you report primarily to the Director General of the department.
Yes. However, what I would say about giving effect to the wishes of the GWC, that's using departmental staff to facilitate the outcomes that the GWC are asking. So if they approve things in principle, for example, they will approve things like electronic gaming machines and table games and changes to policies and procedures in principle, I would give effect to those by processing those outside of a gaming and wagering commission meeting using departmental staff.
How does it work? The GWC expresses a wish that they want you to do something. Do you have to go to the Director General and say, this is what the GWC wishes?
No, I just do that.
Right. So how does the Director General oversee what you do then?
Well, the Director General is my immediate supervisor, so if I'm not doing it, he probably would be involved in that rather than when I am doing it.
But who has the final word as to if and how you carry out the wishes of GWC?
I do. Well, technically, I think the Director General does, but he hasn't intervened in those processes at any point in time.
Why do you say technically?
Well, the Director General is my supervisor. I'm his direct report, so he has responsibility for my performance. Although I have the delegated authority to make those decisions without reference to him.
But do I understand your point to say it hasn't actually occurred in practice, but if the GWC wished you to do something that the Director General didn't agree with, he could override the wishes of GWC?
It hasn't happened in practice, but I think if he directed me to do that, I would not do that, yeah.
Now, if we just go down to paragraph 83 on page 0011, you've summarised here the effect of your roles and as Chief Casino Officer and Deputy Director General in relation to GWC. And you say you take the view that as far as those jobs relate to the casino and GWC, my job beyond employee licensing, that's the CCO role, is to give effect to decisions made by the GWC, which is just another way of saying giving effect to their wishes.
Yes.
But you use the language of decision here, which is a little more formal, yes?
Yes.
And is it the same position if the GWC has passed a resolution by majority? It may not have happened in practice, but if they passed a resolution, made a decision by majority that the Director General did not agree with, hypothetically in that example, your view would be that the Director General could countermand that decision?
It hasn't happened, and we are talking hypothetically, but at the end of the day, I'm an employee of the department. So if the Director General directed me not to do something, I think I wouldn't do it.
All right. So that's the position of decisions of the GWC in meeting. What about decisions of the GWC made by delegated authority? You've got
I have delegated authority,
powers.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Director General's got a whole range of powers,
Yep.
and the Chief Casino Officer has got a whole range of powers. So when those delegated powers lead to a decision made as the delegate, the Director General with his department hat on could countermand those decisions.
Potentially. It hasn't happened.
I understand
Yeah.
that you don't have any
Yeah.
real life examples.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Sorry, you were going to say?
No, I don't have any real life examples.
But we're speaking in a hypothetical
Yeah.
situation. If it did occur, what would happen in your view? And the Director General with his department hat on not his GWC hat on, could countermand a GWC decision, whether by the GWC members in meeting or by a delegate?
I think so.
And just in terms of the decisions in meeting and giving effect to GWC decisions, you stress, of course, that there's been no example that you can recall of any countermand of the decisions. But this is the position, isn't it? To the extent that the GWC in meeting makes decisions or gives directions to you or any other delegate or any person in the department, they do so on the basis of advice.
They consider advice, certainly.
Yeah. You would agree with me, would you, that the membership of the GWC, certainly as it's presently constituted, has limited experience in casino regulation apart from Mr. Sargent?
Yes, I would agree.
And for those members, apart from Mr. Sargent, with their limited experience in casino regulation, they would be particularly reliant upon you and others within the department to give them advice about the decisions they ought make and directions they ought give.
Yes, I think that's fair.
And at paragraph 87 of your witness statement, staying at page 0011, you're describing that role of deputy chairperson there. And just to be clear, in that at 87, are you talking about what you do when you're the deputy chairperson, or whenever you attend a GWC meeting, when you talk about effectively controlling the agenda?
In more recent times, that is post 2017, it's effectively controlling the agenda.
And you do that because Mr. Ord, as chairperson, has limited knowledge and experience in casino regulation?
I do that because he asked me to do that. So, yes, presumably, yes.
So, and I'm not being facetious, I'm just trying to cut to the chase here. You were effectively running the show at GWC meetings from the time Mr. Ord became chairperson.
I think that's fair, yes.
And by running the show, I think you understand what I mean there. You were effectively deciding what would go on the agenda?
I don't think that's quite correct. Certainly when submissions come in from parties who want to get on the agenda, and primarily, that would be Crown, most agendas were made up of Crown items, they would go on an agenda whether I wanted them to go or not. Timing may be an issue, and consideration of what was being asked and how much background work was required for us to provide advice. But I would approve, I guess, the agenda before it went to a commission meeting.
That's going to be my next question. Yeah. So you had ultimate say on what was in the agenda and what wasn't?
At any particular meeting, not over a time span of meetings, because obviously Crown wouldn't be happy, nor would anybody else who wanted an agenda item discussed at a commission meeting if I blocked that for no good reason. But I had control over the agenda, yes. And
you had control over the contents of the briefing papers that supported the agenda?
No. So
what do you mean by no?
So no, in that in most cases, certainly I authored Gaming Wagering Commission briefing papers on different matters, but in lots, if not most cases, they were authored by other people, and they were signed by a director, and the director would sign to say that the paper contained sufficient and appropriate detail for the commission to make decisions on. Now, those would be put into the agenda, and I wouldn't change those.
And you wouldn't look to them and look at one and say, golly, I think that hasn't got nearly enough detail, or I think it's wrong, or you wouldn't do that check?
Yes, I would. If I had questions, I would ask those questions, and on occasion, I would ask people to revisit those and put more information in. But they were authored by somebody else. So I didn't change their recommendations in any way, shape or form.
Right. Did you think it was open to you to change their recommendations?
No, if I'm going to change their recommendations, I think it's open to me to author another paper and make that point.
Let's have a look at paragraph 88, where you describe the central purpose of you attending GWC meetings. Now, let me understand, this paragraph, you articulate the central purpose of your attendance in your capacity as Deputy Director General, not in your capacity as Deputy Chairperson. Stand. And I wanted to deal with little c particularly. Central purpose is to provide advice on all of the agenda items as required and requested. Now, what do you mean by that, given that others were making briefing papers and providing recommendations that you didn't consider you could change?
Simply there for clarification. If the Commission members wanted more information about those papers and what they meant.
And presumably the some of the briefing papers you did prepare yourself.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned this at paragraph 94, which is at page 0012. Go to 93 for a moment. You say the way in which I provided updates to the GWC was through briefing papers. So there were two sorts of briefing papers. One was to say this is what we've done, or this is where things are at. And there was another set of briefing papers to say this is where we think you should go. This is decisions you should make going forward. So you're talking here about the update briefing papers. Is that right?
Well, generally there's no discussion around things that I'd already done. Those things were generally noted. They were discussion about recommendations for action.
All right, so updates means what there?
Updates would be sort of the examples of the updates would be the delegations paper. So there's a paper that describes to the Commission how delegations have been exercised in the previous month. That would be an update. Updates would also include things like revenue information, number of audits and inspections that have been done, those sorts of things.
All right, now, then at 94, are you talking about a different set of briefing and agenda papers, which are the ones sort of looking forward, how the regulatory framework should the direction it should move in?
In that paragraph I am, yes.
Yes. And that's at 95, you say, well, you prepared those briefing papers. Did you prepare all the briefing papers for future action or just some of them?
Just some of them.
Okay. And you give examples of two at paragraph 96. Okay. Just to flag, I don't expect to have time to ask you about the content of those briefing papers specifically today, but we might return to those at a later time. But just if I can ask you a couple of brief questions about these two papers in the broad. Firstly, in relation to the 2015 one about removing full-time inspectors from the actual Perth casino premises, did you write that paper because GWC asked you to?
No.
It was rather your initiative to propose that change for them to approve.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And you explain at 97 in relation to the second briefing paper at 96B, which is to do with the role and responsibility of the GWC with respect to junket operations and money laundering, that at 97 you say the reason that you wrote that paper was because of the GWC was concerned that the media and regulatory focus on junkets and junket play at the casino. So was it their initiative that you put forward that paper, or rather you saw they had a concern and it was your initiative to propose something to address that concern?
So in that circumstance, it was my initiative to provide that paper, but it was more to reinforce the decisions and the understanding that the Commission had previously. Many of the members hadn't been involved in those discussions or had that information.
So when we take these briefing papers as an example, would you agree with me that you actually are adopting a role of initiating and guiding GWC as to the regulatory approach that it should take in respect of casino regulation?
Guiding, yes.
And you considered that to be your responsibility
Yeah,
in your role as Deputy Director General?
yes.
And when you were initiating and guiding the regulatory approach the GWC was to take by... Sorry, I meant to say initiating and guiding. I'll go back. So you were the one who was not just guiding the GWC but also initiating the regulatory suggestions as to the regulatory approach that they should take.
Suggesting, yes.
Yes. And then guiding them with a recommendation as to a certain path or course they should take, which hopefully would culminate in a decision consistent with your recommendation.
Yes.
Right. And sorry, I'll just repeat so it's clear for the transcript. You did that in your role as Deputy Director General.
Yes.
And when you were initiating and guiding in the way in which we've just established the regulatory approach of the GWC, were you acting primarily in the interests of the department or primarily in the interests of GWC?
Primarily, now this is going to, primarily in the interests of both. There's a balance to try to achieve. I mean, it wasn't just trying to achieve the outcomes for the Gaming and Wagering Commission. It's also trying to achieve the regulatory outcomes of the broader department with the same resources. So what I was trying to achieve is a more effective way to do that without having either suffer. So it's hard to say primarily who I was acting for. I was trying to find the most effective solution and the most effective use of those resources that we had available.
Did you feel that that was a task that, on occasion, at least, involved balancing competing factors that were in tension with each other? Typically, how much something would cost versus the value of the regulatory outcome that was to be achieved from that, for that cost.
Competing,
Yes.
absolutely. Yes.
Just changing topics slightly, but not entirely here. If we go to paragraph 166 to 182 of your witness statement, which I think commences at 0019. You're talking about a range of meetings that you, the different sorts of people that you had meetings with and entities in relation to casino regulation, I understand is what you're saying there. Is that right?
That is, yes.
Yeah.
Well, local government, we're looking at para...
166?
Certainly leading on from that, the 167, they're not all casino meetings, but...
All right. So 166 is not limited to casino regulation, it's just stakeholders generally...
Stakeholders, it's DDG meetings, yes.
In relation to regulatory services in the broad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, just to be clear, when you had the meetings that you mentioned at 167D with the GWC, are you talking about meetings other than the monthly meetings?
No.
So you say at 166 it was in your role as DDG, Deputy Director General, but you mean other than on the occasions that you were in the role of Deputy Chairperson?
Yeah.
Now, I do want to change topics here and talk to you about conflicts of interest. Now, you say at paragraph 259 of your witness statement at page 0028 that you're familiar with the department's code of conduct. I beg your pardon. So you're aware that the department has a code of conduct policy document. And is your recollection that the GWC code of conduct was in similar terms to the department's?
Yes.
Now, each of the department and the GWC have introduced codes of conduct at different times. So I want to ask you about from the time, to your recollection, when both of those codes were operative. Each one of them had a code of conduct in place in similar terms. When you were performing regulatory work in relation to the Perth casino, did you consider yourself to be bound by the department's code of conduct, the GWC's code of conduct, or both?
Where they existed and I was aware of them, both.
But you were aware of them, each of them, from the time of them being introduced?
So 2014 I was aware of them, yes.
Right. Now, the department's code of conduct is at gwc.0001.0011.001. This is a version I'm going to show you as at September 2020, not from 2014. Is sort of familiar front page of the code, is it for you?
It's not familiar, but I'm sure I would have seen this. And
Let's go to page 0009, which is the page that deals with conflicts of interest. And I'll just ask you to read to yourself the first paragraph and let me know when you're finished.
yeah, finished.
So I just wanted to draw your attention to the second sentence, where it says we must not allow our private interests to influence our decisions or actions, and then goes on to say this includes appropriately identifying, declaring and managing any personal or private interests that conflict with the broader public interest. Now, taking that in two stages, the requirement to not allow our private interests to influence our decisions or actions. Did you understand during the time that you were Chief Casino Officer and Deputy Director General, whether you had the code of conduct or not, that that was a principle that you had to adhere to?
Yes.
And similarly, that you had to appropriately identify, declare and manage any personal or private interests that conflict with the broader public interest?
Yes.
If we go to the second sentence, and again, I'll just ask you to do that again, just read it through to yourself and then let me know when.
Second paragraph?
Second paragraph on that page. In that first sentence, conflicts of interest arise where there's a conflict between the performance of public duty and private or personal interests. Did you understand that that was the circumstances in which a conflict of interest arose? That was your understanding throughout your entire time as Deputy Director General and Chief Casino Officer?
Yes.
And going to the second sentence where it says conflicts may involve personal, financial or political interests, we'll put that to one side, but then says maybe actual, perceived or potential. Was that your understanding throughout your tenure as Chief Casino Officer and Deputy Director General, that a conflict could either be actual or perceived or potential?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
And did you understand that to mean that it could appear as if you had a conflict of interest even if you didn't actually have one?
Yes.
And that was still something that needed to be declared and managed?
Yes.
And if we go down to the fourth paragraph, do you see where it commences, it is not always possible to avoid a conflict of interest?
Yes.
You just read that paragraph to yourself and tell me when you're finished.
Yep.
So it advises that it's not always possible to avoid one, and then says, therefore, it's the management of that conflict, actual, perceived or potential, that is important, right? goes on to to say that you must declare any conflict of interest of which you become aware. Did you understand that that was your responsibility throughout your time as Chief Casino Officer?
Yes.
Even in relation to perceived or potential conflicts? Now, at paragraph 262 of your witness statement at page 0029, we just pull out 262, please. You're talking here about a conflict of interest policy, and you say it could be improved so as to require staff members, whether it only be authorised officers or staff more generally, to complete a conflicts of interest declaration on an annual basis.
Yes.
And you say that because for officers generally, it would be a way to have them bring to the front of their minds on a regular basis a consideration of whether or not they have conflicts of interest.
That's exactly why I say that, yes.
But you knew in any event, without such a register, did you, that conflicts of interest should be front of mind at all times?
Yes.
And that you had to declare them if you had actual perceived or potential conflict?
Yes, but not repeatedly declare them.
Understand?
Yeah.
Declare them once
And
once
declared.
is enough.
Yeah.
Yes, understood. If we can go back to the policy document, please. And we were at page 0009. And that last paragraph on that page, it says conflicts of interest in the first sentence arise when personal interests can influence or appear to influence our decision-making responsibilities and our work duties. Now, you understood that to be the position throughout your time as Chief Casino
Yes.
Officer and Deputy Director General. The second sentence, this includes receiving or offering of gifts, benefits and hospitality. See that?
Yes.
You understood that
I
that
understand that, yes.
was a conflict of interest. Just in relation to that last sentence, including receiving or offering of gifts, benefits and hospitality, did you think that that was was your understanding that that was the limit of what amounted to a conflict of interest?
No, it includes what could be considered a conflict of interest. It's not the limit.
All right. What else do you think might constitute a conflict of interest outside of the provision of or the receiving or offering of gifts, benefits and hospitality?
I guess anything that anyone could see as a potential or perceive as being an interest that doesn't align with work interests.
Have you got any examples in your mind that come to the fore immediately?
Well, I guess the friendships is one that could come to the fore immediately for me.
Now, with the benefit of hindsight, given everything that's happened, or was it always front of brain, if I can put it that way?
Well, it's always been front of brain because I genuinely believe I haven't allowed it to influence anything, and it hasn't. There is no actual conflict of interest. It's managing the potential and perceived. Now, I've declared those friendships, but I haven't continued to declare them on any sort of ongoing basis.
Let's go over the page to 0010 of the policy, and here are conduct expectations. So you understand these to have been guides to specific behaviour relevant to conflicts of interest. And the first point's very general, isn't it? Identify, declare, appropriately manage conflicts of interest, actual, perceived or potential, between personal interests and public duty. And then there's some much more specific actions and expectations in the remaining bullet points. When you were considering what you had to do to address conflicts of interest appropriately in your time as Chief Casino Officer and Deputy Director General. Did you think that meeting the expectations in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th bullet points was sufficient, or that there was some further expectation of you that was encompassed within the first bullet point?
I'm not quite second, so can you repeat that for me, please? Yep.
Complicated question,
Yeah.
and I apologise for that. So what I'm driving at is you've got this very general bullet point
Yeah.
at the beginning, which says in terms, well, identify, manage, declare and manage conflicts, which sort of then leaves one thinking, okay, well, when, how and why,
Yeah.
arguably. But you've got these more specific bullet points where they say, well, these are the things I will and won't do, or I'm expected to do.
Yep.
So my question is, when you were considering the Code of Conduct, when you were Chief Casino Officer and Deputy Director General, did you think that fulfilling the more specific bullet points was sufficient to identify, declare and manage conflicts, or that there was some other responsibility or expectation upon you?
No, I think fulfilling the dot points. Yeah.
Now, you describe in your witness statement friendships that you had with 3 people employed by Crown Perth, and
Yes.
I want to come back to those people in a moment. I'm not going to
Yep.
talk to you about the people specifically right now. But first of all, I want to address paragraphs 327 to 333 of your witness statement, which is at pages 34 to 35. So 327, under the heading, how do you say that? Stagecraft.
Stagecraft, yes.
Runabout.
That's correct. Mhm.
So can I just understand in summary form the import of what you're saying in these paragraphs? Put shortly, in about 2015-16, you bought a boat for about $8,000 with a view of doing it up to sell it. Is that right?
It was a project, that's right, yeah.
And after you had done it up, one of those friends from Crown Perth, who we'll speak about in a moment, expressed an interest in buying it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And having spent close to $5,000 fixing it up, you sold it to him for $13,000 and made a $116 profit.
Yes.
And the point I want to take, the real point of my questioning, just to get that background clear, is to take you to the email which you refer to at page, and which is at page 0038 of your witness statement. That's Annexure B, in which you disclose the sale to Mr. Sargent, who was then the Director General of the department. And in the second sentence of the first paragraph, and then the second last paragraph, you say in terms that you don't consider this to be a real or potential conflict of interest. And that was your thought at the time.
That was my thought at the time.
Yeah. You also say in the first sentence, in addition to it not being a real or potential conflict of interest, not a perceived conflict of interest. And that's what you thought at the time.
And that was my opinion, yes.
Yeah.
That it shouldn't be perceived as that.
So you were only disclosing to Mr. Sargent out of an abundance of caution and not because you thought you had to.
Yes.
In the next paragraph, you make some points about the transaction. That's the second paragraph there with the dot points. You see that?
Yes.
One is that you were not getting any benefit out of the transaction beyond a fair value. Yes?
That's correct.
And that's the point you're trying to make in the second and fourth bullet
Yep.
points.
Correct.
I just want to ask you about the first and third bullet points. First bullet point is you say it's not a private interest that conflicts with my public duty, and that's what you thought at the time.
That's what I thought at the time, considering in the context that I had declared the friendship with this person to Barry Sargent as the Director General. Yes.
All right, so you saying your evidence is that you didn't think it was a private interest that conflicted with your public duty because, importantly, you had previously declared the friendship to Mr. Sargent.
Yes.
Let me just ask you another question about that bullet point and what you've said there. Would you agree that your public duty, describe public duty there, your public duty expressed at its broadest is to regulate, relevantly, you've got other jobs, but to regulate the Perth casino in the public interest on behalf of the people of Western Australia?
Yes, I would.
And at the heart of regulating the regulation of the Perth casino is regulating what a casino operator can or cannot do.
That's correct.
And as the Chief Casino Officer, Deputy Chairperson of the GWC, and Deputy Director General of the Department with responsibility for casino regulation, in other words, a very senior position within the regulator in respect of casinos, you had the power to influence, if not decide, what the casino operator could or could not do.
I don't think decide, but influence I would agree with, yes.
And did it occur to you at the time that you were selling this boat to a Crown employee that the person in the street could take the view that your independence in the role of influencing what Crown Perth could or could not do as a casino operator could be influenced by this transaction?
No, I don't think that occurred to me at the time. I wouldn't have done it otherwise.
For example, all right, so you didn't think about that at the time. I'm going to ask you to put something to you and see whether your position remains the same now. What if, for example, it could be perceived that your friend had taken the boat off your hands to save you the trouble of having to sell it at arm's length? Could you see how someone might see that as a perceived conflict of interest?
No, not until, I wouldn't have even thought of that as a scenario.
Do you think of it now?
Well, I do now. You've asked me about it, but I wouldn't have even thought of that as a scenario.
What about if the man in the street perceived that it could have been difficult for you to sell the boat through an arm's length sale to recoup the money you had spent on it, and this was a favour, if you will, to take the boat off your hands to recoup your money?
Again, I wouldn't have thought of that as a scenario, no.
Do you think of it now?
Well, again, once you've raised that with me, potentially.
Let's have a look at the third bullet point. You say, not a transaction that should be perceived as having any ability to influence any decision I make in the future. Would you agree in hindsight that it could be perceived as a transaction that had the ability to influence a decision you made in the future?
I think that's a significant stretch given that transaction. It certainly didn't translate into an ability to influence. I don't know, different people would perceive different things, I guess, yeah.
So you remain of the view that it did not amount to a perceived conflict of interest?
In my mind, I don't think, no, in my mind it wasn't a perceived conflict of interest. In other people's mind it may have been something different.
And this is an old chestnut, we're going back to before I was asking you questions about conflicts of interest, but you signed this as Deputy Director General because that's your main casino regulatory role?
Yes.
Right. And you addressed it to Mr. Sargent as Director General because of the department, not as Chair of GWC, because he's who you report to in your capacity of Director General of the department.
Yeah, not quite that much thought goes into this. That's an email and that signature's generated automatically. So Deputy Director General's on there, so I wouldn't have changed it. And I wrote to Barry, but as the Director General, yes.
Now, did you inform GWC at the time that you sent this email to Mr. Sargent in similar terms?
No.
Did it occur to you at the time to do so?
No, it did not.
Does it occur to you now that you should have?
No. Again, Barry's the chair. Well, the Director General is the chairman of the Gaming and Wagering Commission, if that happened now, and the chair thought that that was something that would need to be declared, I would do it.
Did you expect him to receive this information in the dual capacities of Chair of the GWC and Director General of the department?
I expected him to receive this in the capacity of the Director General, and then he could make his own mind up about where that needed to go and what needed to happen with it. He was my immediate manager.
All right, now let's go back to the body of your witness statement at page...
Just before you do that, while that document's on the screen, Mr Connolly, I realise you're not a lawyer, and the question that I'm going to ask you does have a legal basis, but don't worry about that. You'll see in the first bullet point, the words are private interest and public duty, and that's the wording in the Code of Conduct. Did you give thought to what those words mean and whether there could be other aspects around the notion of conflict?
No, Commissioner, I think I've just taken those out of the Code of Conduct to try to address what I thought were the requirements of the Code of Conduct.
Thank you.
Learned Junior reminds me I haven't tendered the Code of Conduct, which I'll do so now, Commissioner. That's GWC.0011.0011.001.
The Code of Conduct of the Department which bears the document identifier that Ms Cale has just read out, will be admitted into evidence as an exhibit.
Now, going back to the body of the witness statement at page 0035. And at paragraph 338, you begin to give some evidence about another one of your friend's retirement parties when he was a Crown employee and and Crown put on a retirement party for him. And that was in 2019.
That's correct.
And you mentioned 15 other department employees who were invited and Crown was paying for the catering.
Correct, yep.
Now, at 341, having just referred to the fact that Crown would be paying for all the catering, you say, for this reason, I asked for a list of all the department employees that had been invited. This reason is that Crown was paying for the catering. Is that right? So I come back to this. Is that a really important feature of conflict of interest in your mind, whether someone's paying for something or you're getting a tangible benefit?
Well, it was here. For me, this wasn't as a result of any friendship. This was hospitality that was being paid for. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody who'd been invited, who was going to go, that the Director General had approved their attendance at that. And the distinction for me was Crown was paying for this event. All
right. Now, I just want to ask you, I'm going to move now to ask you some questions about your friends that you've mentioned in your witness statement. The first one is John Nichols at paragraph 303 and following, page 32. Now, the fact of the matter is that he was actually a friend from department days. He had worked at the department as well.
That's correct.
And for a similar length of time, he began fairly much when you began at the department back in late 80s, early 90s.
That's correct.
When did he retire?
2 or 3 years ago, perhaps.
All right. And I understand from paragraphs 307 and 308 of your witness statement that he took a job with Crown at some point. Mm-hmm. Do you remember approximately when?
Probably 2 or 3 years before that, prior.
Right. But do I understand correctly that job had nothing to do with casino regulation?
Not as I recall, nothing to do with gaming and the things that I was generally involved in.
But anything to do with casino regulation beyond gaming?
Not that I recall.
All right. I don't intend to ask you any more questions about Mr. Nichols. Now, can I ask you about Paul, do you say it Hume?
Hume.
Yeah. You describe your friendship with him commencing at paragraph 294 of the witness statement, that's page 0032. And this was another friendship from department days, is that right?
That's right.
and you had been friends since the 1990s?
Yeah, so Paul would have been one of those senior inspectors who conducted initial training. So
And he took
90.
sorry, I beg your pardon?
Yep.
What did you say?
1990 then.
Yeah, sorry. In 2009, he took a job at Perth Casino,
Yes.
and he took a job straight into the legal and compliance team, did he?
Yes.
And what do you understand the legal and compliance team at Perth Casino to do?
In terms of gaming regulation or in broader terms?
Well, let's break it down in broad terms first.
So I understand that they have responsibilities for broad compliance functions, that is, things like insurance, legal, other things besides gaming, but they also help the gaming operational areas in the preparation of submissions and other material that is going to be submitted to the department and ultimately GWC.
Well, you spoke a little while ago about the casino manuals with which the Perth Casino has to comply. And is it the case that the compliance team is involved in facilitating modifications to the regulatory requirements imposed by the regulator?
Yes, it is.
And obviously changes to regulatory requirements can be the increasing of regulatory requirements as sought by the regulator,
Yes.
or the relaxation of regulatory requirements, primarily as sought by Crown.
Yes.
Not invariably, there might be reasons why the department or GWC, because of technological advances or something like that, might no longer see a need for a more restrictive regulation. Would you agree?
I would agree, yeah.
But by and large, if there's to be a relaxation of regulatory requirement, it typically, or in the majority of cases, emanates and is initiated by Crown.
Yeah, I think that's fair, yes.
Yeah. And in terms, you're aware, I think you've mentioned this in your witness statement, you are aware of these regular operations division meetings that were held between Crown officers and officers of the department / GWC?
Yes.
You participated in those
I did.
many a time.
Yes, I did.
Although I understood from your witness statement in more recent times when you remained Chief Casino Officer and had your regulatory role as Deputy Director General, you'd sort of become a less frequent attendant.
That's correct.
Right. And if we can just look at this document as an example, CRW.700.003.036_R. These are some redacted minutes of the Operations Division meeting of the 6th of March 2020. And it was at these sorts of meetings, wasn't it, these regular meetings, that there were discussions, amongst other things, about the regulatory requirements.
Correct.
And typically whether they were to be modified in any way, added to or relaxed.
Correct, yes.
Just ask you a question along the way, which is there a reason why they were apparently, looking at the insignia in the left-hand corner, created by Crown?
The minutes were generally kept by Crown.
Why was that?
I don't know. Historically, the executive office has been provided by Crown for those meetings.
And Paul, Mr. Hume attended these meetings typically?
When he was working there, yes, he did.
When he was working for Crown?
When he was,
Yeah,
correct, yeah.
I think you say that at 178.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you remember what Mr. Hume's specific role within the legal and compliance team was?
In terms of job title or in terms of role?
Both, if you have it.
I can't remember the job title. I thought it was Manager Legal and Compliance, but I can't remember. But his role was to, certainly in my dealings with him, to help put together Crown submissions for all manner of things, whatever it was they wanted to be considered by the regulator.
submissions to the regulator about things that they wanted considered by the regulator?
Yes.
And those submissions would be made to you?
They would typically be addressed to me as a Deputy Director General, or in some cases as the Chief Casino Officer. They would address those correspondence. But they would go to departmental officers, yeah.
But then they would be carried up the line through to GWC meetings?
Yes, they would.
And you would, if not always, but at least on a good number of occasions, have the carriage of those matters before the GWC?
Yes, that's fair.
And advise in relation to them and make recommendations?
Yes, I would.
And just to be clear, I should have said this about the operations division meetings, but when Mr Hume was attending, you were also typically in attendance at the same time in those meetings?
Typically, yes.
And discussing things such as the relaxation or enhancement of regulatory requirements?
As and when required, and a whole range of other things, as you can see, development of site and other things, yeah.
Commissioner, may I please tender the redacted minutes of the 6th of March 2020?
Could I just see the number, please?
You can call it out if you wish.
The number. The minutes of the Operations Division meeting of the 6th of March 2020 with the identifier CRW.700.003.0306 will be admitted into evidence as an exhibit.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, can I ask about Claude Murray, who you speak of from paragraph 320? 0038. Thank you. 33. Typing error. Now, Mr Murray is different from Mr Hume in the sense that he has never worked for the department.
That's correct.
Right. And you explain how you met him in the course of your work as a casino, in your casino regulatory work in about 2012. What was his job then?
I think, as I point out there, as Manager of Legal Compliance.
All right. And when you describe him as the manager, did you understand him from 2012 to have overall, amongst other things, of course, overall responsibility for compliance with the regulatory regime you were primarily responsible for implementing on behalf of GWC and the department?
No, I don't think he had overall responsibility for that. I think his role was more around providing advice to others who had that responsibility in different areas.
All right. And he usually attended operations division meetings?
Yes.
And that remains the position today?
I believe so.
So through 2012 to now?
Certainly up until the last time I attended an operations meeting.
It's asking a bit much for you to give evidence about what's happening there now. I understand that. Now, paragraph 319, page 0034, you explain that you've gone fishing for crayfish with Mr Murray since 2013.
I think about 2013, yeah.
Each year during the crayfishing season.
That's correct.
So that's just a series of weeks?
Usually for us, 4 or 5 weeks or so, yeah.
And it's a couple of days a week that you do that?
2 or 3 days a week, yeah.
And you also mention, in addition to that, at paragraph 323, you've been on about 4 or 5 additional fishing trips with him over the years.
Correct.
From 2015.
Correct.
And so they're weekend trips away.
Yes, that's correct.
Trip.
That's correct.
And you've also been out to dinner with Mr Murray and Mr Hume a handful of times with your partners since 2012?
Correct.
So in summary, would you describe, and I will put them together and you tell me if you want me to separate them to make it easier to answer. Mr Murray and Mr Hume, you would describe both of them as good friends of yours?
Yes, I think I would.
Would you describe them as close friends?
No, I wouldn't describe them as close. I see them regularly but infrequently. I would say good friends.
Would you describe them as long-standing friends of
Certainly
yours?
Paul, I would. Yeah.
but not so much Mr Murray.
I see Claude, again, infrequently. I would consider him a good friend, yes, but
Now, you make the point in your witness statement that you didn't hide these friendships from the department and were quite open and transparent about discussing them, those friendships, including with each of the Director Generals under which you served.
that's correct, yes.
So that's Mr Sargent and Mr Ord.
Yes.
And you're not suggesting, though, are you, that you made declarations or notification of those friendships to those Directors General in the same way that you did in relation to the sale of the boat or the way in which you dealt with the retirement party for Mr Hume?
I do have recollection of sending an email to Barry in or about 2012-13 about a particular weekend trip. But certainly for the others, no, I'm not suggesting that. I could have been a lot more formal than I have been.
Okay, so just to be clear, I'm just trying to get the evidence as precisely as I can. You've got a recollection of sending an email about a particular fishing trip, is that right?
I have a recollection about being asked to send an email to him about that, yes.
But about a particular
Yes,
fishing
yes.
trip. And that was with Mr Murray, was it?
Yes,
In about 2012,
2012-13, somewhere around there, yeah.
But you did not, to your recollection, send an email about the friendships with Mr Hume and Mr Murray generally?
I don't recall, no.
Or any of the other fishing trips?
No, I have no recollection of those, no.
Okay.
I do recall talking to Barry about those. And obviously Barry has knowledge of those friendships with Paul and John more specifically because he knows Paul and John worked in the department as well. So I have talked to him about those, but absolutely not formally.
Right. Now, if we go back up to paragraph 266 at page 0029. 0029. So here, I think you're expressing the sentiment that you just expressed, which is that you could have been more formal in your and more regular in your disclosure of those friendships to the department.
Absolutely.
And you say you could have done that in a more complete way. I want to draw your attention here to the purpose for which you said you say you should have done that, and that's to avoid any allegations or perceptions of a conflict of interest with respect to your friends. Do you think now that the friendships you have with Mr Murray and Mr Hume could create a perception of a conflict of interest?
I think they could create a perception of a conflict of interest, but I think they could be managed as well. So as long as the Commission is aware of those friendships and they take those into consideration.
Now, I'll come back to that point, but did you think at any time before this issue was raised earlier this year and became quite notorious, at any time prior to that, did you think that your friendships with Mr Murray and Mr Hume could create a perception of a conflict of interest?
I thought they were sufficiently declared and known, but certainly, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I think that I would agree now that there could be a perception of that for sure. Did I think then?
So I don't want to conflate 2 points.
Yeah.
One is whether you thought you had an actual perception of a conflict of... the two words together.
Yeah.
Whether you had a perception of a conflict of interest at the time, and the second is whether you should have, or whether you did declare it or could have declared it more fully.
I think there could be a perception at the time.
You did think that?
Yeah, and but I also believe that I had declared it, and that certainly at the time in 2012, 2013, that my Director General was aware of those friendships.
All right, I just want to take that in stages, please. First of all, why did you think there could be a perception of a conflict of interest at the time?
Friends with people from Crown.
But why does that create a perception of conflict of interest?
Well, again, perception's something that's personal, so it's not. I don't have a perception, but I can see that other people may have a perception that there's a conflict of interest, and those friendships may influence or have the potential to influence.
Well, you were in a position to influence or decide the regulatory requirements for the Perth Casino.
Yeah.
And Mr Hume and Mr Murray were directly involved on behalf of Perth Casino in liaising with you and the department regarding the regulatory requirements of the Perth Casino. Yes?
Yes.
And you were close friends with both of them.
Yes.
Did it occur to you at any time, until recently, that the person in the street could perceive that you might be influenced in your independent thought processes about whether to recommend, proceed with a certain course of action, about whether to relax or tighten regulatory requirements for the Perth Casino because of your friendship with those two men?
I don't think I gave it enough thought. I think I would concede that I absolutely could have done better and declared these more formally. But yes, it didn't occur to me.
But your reflection now
Yes.
is to do with something that's occurred to you, that the person in the street might think that that close friendship could influence you to make decisions that would make life easier rather than more difficult for your friends in relation to the regulatory requirements in Perth Casino. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And that occurs to you now?
Absolutely.
Didn't occur to you at the time?
Again, I declared that to my manager, and if it would have occurred to him, I would have thought he would have raised that with me as well. But again,
All right. Now, talking about, as you're sitting here today, reflecting with that wonderful hindsight that we all have after the event, do you characterise it as a perceived conflict of interest or an actual conflict of interest?
I characterise it as a perceived conflict of interest because that friendship has not influenced any decisions that I've made, I don't believe.
Well, how do you know, Mr Connolly?
How do I know? Because they were things that I would have done, and I haven't allowed that. I don't think I've allowed that to happen. I think, the records of the types of decisions that have been made with the Gaming and Wagering Commission and the input I've had would show that, on balance, there is a balance. There is a balance of things that I've supported, and I've articulated an argument why I've supported them, and things that I haven't supported from Crown. And again, I've articulated the argument why I haven't supported them. I don't necessarily agree with everything that Crown puts in front of it.
How can you be so sure, sitting here now, that you have never been influenced in your role as regulator by your friendship with Mr Hume or Mr Murray or both?
Well, I guess I can say I've never knowingly been influenced, and I'm still not aware of any influence that has been exerted on me. And I don't think they would try to influence or exert influence on me.
Well, they might not even try to exert influence on you. It might be subconsciously you just want to do right by your friends.
No.
That's possible, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. Doing right by... No, I don't think that's possible.
Imposing... sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
You go.
No, but finish.
Well,
Please finish if you were in mid-sentence.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. That they... I am conscious of that friendship, and I'm conscious of my role when I'm providing the Commission with advice. I provide them with the best advice that I can provide them, and I will always articulate to them the reasons why I think a position, or try to, why a position is the right position and not, and why something is the wrong way to go. Now, you're talking about influence and whether I know. Well, I'm not knowingly aware of any time that they have influenced me. It's not something that I'm conscious of. Maybe they have, but I don't believe so.
has it occurred to you that that is why the code of conduct is expressed to extend to the need to identify, declare and manage perceived conflicts of interest?
I have declared those perceived conflicts of interest, though.
Yes, it's a slightly different question.
Yeah.
Just in terms of your confidence that you have never acted under the influence of your friendship in your regulatory role, has it occurred to you, again, now, looking back, that that's the reason why the Code of Conduct extends to identifying, declaring and managing perceived conflicts, ones that look like they could be, even if you don't feel they are?
Not without the benefit of hindsight.
Does that occur to you now?
It occurs to me now.
Right. Now, you talk about having declared the friendships.
Yeah.
Can you just explain how you declared them?
So they would be in conversations with Barry. Predominantly this was Barry. These were more before the machinery of government changes. So I would tell Barry about these things. Whether I told him about everyone, I seriously doubt that, but I would have told him on regular occasions what I was doing.
Just give us an example of a conversation that you had with him about these friendships.
So weekend fishing trips, I would see Barry and just so you're aware, this is what I'm doing.
Anything else?
And I do recall him asking me to send him an email at one point just to have a record of that. I have a recollection of that conversation. I can't find the evidence of the email. I have looked.
Otherwise, it was just verbal.
Verbal, yep.
That you were going on a fishing trip with Mr. Murray.
That's right.
Now, in relation to Mr. Hume and Mr. Murray, separately from the fishing trips, you were good friends.
Yeah.
Did you ever, you never put in writing that you were good friends, to the department that you were good friends of either of these men?
No, I don't believe so.
Did you ever verbally tell either Director General that you were good friends of these men?
Yes,
And,
certainly Barry.
all right, now just tell me about an example, with more than one conversation?
More than one conversation.
And give me an example of a conversation you had about that.
Well, that would be the same thing. Barry was the Director General for 25 years. He knew these people and he knew the relationships in the department. So he knew that I was good friends with Paul and John, and I would have told him that when we were going on these trips that included Claude. I was friends with Claude.
Talking about the fishing trips, I'm talking about the friendships.
Well, predominantly they were when I saw these people. I didn't, apart from the odd birthday and the odd dinner over that 12-year period, 10-year period, whatever it is, I didn't socialise with them on any sort of continuous, regular basis. I saw them in work settings.
They were good friends, Mr. Connolly, weren't they?
I would consider them to be good friends, yeah.
And you saw them every month at operational divisions meetings?
I did.
Without rehearsing, you discussed at those times the regulatory toing and froing between Crown and regulator.
Without rehearsing, what do you mean? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, without rehearsing, I mean without repeating myself. From
Oh,
earlier.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
Yeah.
So if I want to just take a step back, would you accept the correctness of this proposition? You can go on a fishing trip with people you hardly know and never see them again. That may or may not have any relevance to the declaration of a conflict of interest. Would you agree?
Yes.
The real issue here is that these chaps were your good friends.
Yeah.
And that you never declared in writing.
Well, I'm not saying I didn't. I may have. I just haven't been able to find the evidence of that at the moment, unfortunately for me. Yeah.
Just to finish off, Commissioner, noting the time, when you had these conversations with Mr. Sargent, specifically about the friendships, did you specifically say, I am telling you that I am good friends with Mr. Murray because it is relevant to whether I have an actual or perceived conflict of interest?
No, I wouldn't have framed it that way.
Did he ever ask you in the did you name Mr. Hume or Mr. Murray in those conversations? And there was no discussion raised by Mr. Sargent about an actual or perceived conflict of interest in maintaining those friendships and your role as in the regulator at the same time?
No.
And did you make any such disclosures to GWC?
No.
I can leave it there for the moment.
Thank you. We will resume at 2 p.m. Thank you.